Bermudez is our guest speaker tonight. A leader in Catholic journalism, he is the executive director of ACI Prensa and EWTN, as well as Catholic News Agency. Born in Peru, Alejandro studied at the University of Lima. He currently directs a weekly TV program on EWTN in Spanish called Cara a Cara, or Face to Face in English. He has served in various Catholic leadership roles, written books, and received numerous awards for his inspiring work. We look forward to hearing what he will share with us, and we are excited for the thought-provoking and insightful discussion that Alejandro, we are honored to have you here as our speaker this evening. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Mr. Alejandro Bermudez.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Can you hear me well?
Yep, we can hear you. Okay,
excellent. Well, I appreciate the invitation. It's always a blessing for me to talk to young people because in my experience, I had that opportunity. I had someone older than me being willing to talk to me when I was young, especially because I was not raised Catholic, which is something unusual in Latin America. Most of us and our families are raised Catholic, at least sociologically. It wasn't my case, so it was a blessing to have that opportunity, and since then I've been trying to pay that back. So for me, it's a blessing. It's a great opportunity that I really appreciate. So I'm really happy to be here. So having said that, in the conversation with the leaders of this ministry, I suggested, and they agree, that it would be interesting to bring the issue of how our younger generations are becoming more diverse. And as they become more diverse, one of those diversities is religious diversity. And we have a growing number in your generation, both younger millennials and Generation Z, to put it a name for now, the number of people who are not associated with a religion is growing. Now, as you know, those numbers are still a little bit tricky because we don't know how many of those are becoming remain still Christian, but not associated with a particular denomination. How many of them consider themselves, as they describe themselves, spiritual but not religious? And what exactly that means, if there is a belief in God or not, and therefore if that position can be called a religion, quote unquote, or not. But what we do know is a number of younger generations, that younger members of the new generations that consider themselves agnostic, is a larger number, or directly atheist, is growing. And they are setting or they are coming with a set of questions and a set of arguments that were not usual in the recent past. Is something that my generation or even younger generations did not have to deal. And since we are in a very pragmatic society, in a society that is looking for results, for rapid gratifications, and if I'm not going to go into the details of why society has become that will be a total rabbit hole for the purpose of the conversation. But we know that, and a lot of questions come to religion in general, and to Catholics in particular, come from that pragmatic perspective. Basically, they ask, what is religion good for? Keep in mind that in the religious mentality, if you go, let's say, previous to the Renaissance in Christian Europe, that will be a kind of a silly question, a question that would not make a lot of sense, because the cultural Christian perspective, the practicality of religion is irrelevant, or is the fact that there is a God that is beyond discussion, because faith is the quintessential cultural component, and therefore God is good, and my relationship with God is good, and society is a bunch of people like me who are in that relationship with that same God through a specific religion. So the question of what religion is good for is wouldn't make sense. It does not, and it's a question that we have to answer, because we have people that are asking that question, and part of our witnessing as Christians is addressing that question. So recently, a critic and political analyst, Max Boot, B-O-O-T, wrote an interesting article on the Washington Post. And Max Boot is an immigrant from Russia, but he's an immigrant from the days of the Soviet Union. So he was raised as an atheist in his family, in his schooling. And when he came to the United States, he acquired a sympathy to religion, but not a specific denomination he will practice. But he will understand how opposite the role of religious freedom is in the United States compared to his Soviet Union. But recently wrote an article, as I said, on the Washington Post, in which he said that too much religion was bad for societies, and therefore for individual human beings. And he made a quite interesting point, which is he took some markers, level of education, for example, or degree of education, income, access to health, and other very specific and there's very measurable elements in a society. And he came up with an interesting conclusion, basically that the countries that were the countries that were less religious and more secular were doing far better in these factors, and the most religious countries were exactly the opposite. So he said, and let me quote here, less religious nations are much better off. And he cited in particular Japan, the Christian house Australia, who has become a very secular country, Belgium, Britain, and Sweden, who happen to have one of the lowest rates of religious practice and religious belief. But he said that, quoting him, devout countries lack such advantages. And he listed India, which is, as you know, mostly Hindu, Nigeria, which is Christian and Muslim, and both populations are fairly devout, Pakistan, which is vast majority Muslim, the Philippines, which is Catholic, and Thailand, which is Buddhist. In this obviously made the rounds, and in the sense that all those younger people who are making the case that religion is not beneficial for society and therefore for the human being, that may include those that use the motto like guns do not kill people, religion does, found this argument very compelling, and they found it as a tool to bash in the head of every other believer, because using arguments to bash in the heads of someone else has become, unfortunately, common practice in this time of social media. And probably, as I was reading today, in an interesting comment of how we have become, as a nation, extremely polarized, how is very likely that that polarization is not going to change after the elections. Probably the intensity and sometimes meanness of the debate may abate, but the polarization won't. So Max Boot's argument were basically using that sense to say, listen, this is the living proof that religion is for countries and societies disadvantaged. Boot made the case that the United States remains a total exception among developing countries because it's the only developed country that still have a significant religious practice, even if declining, but is way beyond the practice of the affluent Western Europe. But there was a young doctorate candidate, a Catholic at the University of Virginia, who responded to Boot on a website that is fairly interesting. It's a website that is called thepublicdiscourse.com, which is religious sympathetic, but it's not a religious site. It's a site in which rational arguments are made from the perspective of believers. So it's an interesting site to visit because you can see how people inspired in the Christian tradition try to make an argument that can be compelling for anybody, not only believers, who are looking at sound arguments and obviously sound data as well. And this guy, Chuck, kind of challenged, actually not kind of, directly challenged Boot to say, to actually consider other factors that should be included into the equation of who lives better and how religion influences in people living better or not. And let me quote what Chuck wrote. He says, "Being well educated and living longer may not be so great if one lives depressed and suffering from compulsive addiction, then dies alone and forgotten. And religious faith is a major reason people can escape such sad fates," he said. And continue with the argument, Chuck wrote, "Wealthy and secularized countries face unprecedented levels of social isolation, depression, and loneliness." And he noted that Japan, Sweden, and Great Britain lead the world in number of child and teenage suicide rates, which happen to be some of the countries that Max Boot mentioned as the countries with the greater rates of income, life expectancy, and education, and so forth. All the other, if you want, material measurable indexes. And is interesting that in the opposite side, Chalk found that that religious nations are the ones with least suicidal tendencies. The least suicidal country happens to be the Philippines, which ranks 159th among nations in terms of wealth and material well-being, followed by Pakistan, which is 169th nation in terms of wealth and well-being. And as opposed to the fact that a recent a recent poll made by the government, by the Department of Health of Great Britain, found that 2019, I think these figures are probably worse um, after the COVID, or in midst of the COVID pandemic. But they found that 14% of the total population says that often or always feel lonely. 14% of people that often or always feel lonely. So we are not counting here the even larger number of people that sometimes feel lonely. Is a really big number. Is a really big number. And normally a Department of Health does not have the tools to solve that problem, because there is no way that a government decision will change someone's lonely life. The fact that you don't have relatives anymore, you didn't have kids, so you don't have someone who can take care of you, or you just social mobility have taken your relatives away from you to better opportunities, to the city where you don't live anymore, and so forth. So um, this is obviously a very, very simple, if you want, bordering simplistic approach to the comparison between feeling good and feeling well, and doing good and doing well. But I think in a kind of a snapshot, provides the opportunity to go deeper, to raise the questions with your peers, guys, about uh, a very, very key uh, issue in everybody's life, in the life of humanity, which is, what is the human being made for? Why? What is the human being's destiny? And if we start by saying, listen, we're just animals, evolved animals, uh, there is still the possibility for someone that says, we are we are basically only animals, that there is a combined factors. There is a combination of factors that we can all agree to call happiness. So that human beings are not here just to eat and sleep and reproduce and to go to the bathroom, but the reason why people chooses to say, okay, I'm going to study this, and even if someone says, I'm going to study business because I want to be a really wealthy person and just enjoy life, is still a plan for happiness. Even if it is still something that the rest of of the sentient beings in the planet do not have. A monkey can be super smart. Bonobo can be 99% equal to our DNA, but bonobos do not make plans for the future. So just the fact that we all agree that we make plans for the future, and even those who say, no, listen, I want to live my life on today, that person knows that even if he wants to live his life as today, quote unquote, tomorrow is going to be another today. And he needs to plan for that. He needs a source of income. He needs a place where to stay. So the pure live today really doesn't exist, or is an extreme anomaly. The vast majority of us look for something to achieve and accomplish. And when we bring this issue of what is a destiny, why people who have everything from the material standpoint, including future, are so disappointed of life that commit suicide at a significant rate, like as I was saying, Japan, Sweden, and Britain, in Great Britain, in terms of young population, and even children population. I think it raises a fair question, question that is not faith-based, it's just human-based, of what are we made for? And I think that anybody that connects that question, who is not purely theoretical, because it touches some aspects of the insight, because normally that question cannot be answered in the abstract. Because if someone answers me, well, I think human beings are made to just, live and reproduce, and they are smarter, so, they can enjoy life a little bit more, because are self-conscious and self-aware, unlike other sentient beings. I will still propose a question to say, listen, I am not asking what is the purpose of human beings. I'm asking, what is your purpose? What do you think is your purpose? Is a question that can only be honestly answered from a personal, even if you want subjective perspective. And I think there is a point in which we can start a really good, promising common ground to establish a communication about the value of life. And that does not necessarily include someone going all the way to say, oh, okay, I believe there is a God. He, made me, and therefore I have, like St. Augustine says, this longing for God. But as Pope Benedict said, before he was Pope Benedict, when he was the Ratzinger, the theologian, he said something that I found very early quite fascinating, which is the changes in the world are probably making us Christians to become a minority, and we're more and more becoming a minority. That's not a bad thing. Obviously, it's a challenge, because Jesus, we believe that Jesus came to save the whole humanity. So, ideally, the whole humanity should be saved by Jesus Christ, by accepting Jesus Christ. But things are the way they are, not the way we would like to. They are just the way they are. And the way they are right now is that, for a fact, in Europe, Christians have become a complete minority. And we don't know what is going to happen with the gigantic phenomenal cathedrals and all the churches and all the the seminaries, I saw that in Ireland, for example, where the population went from practicing over 90% to practicing below 9% in a little bit more than a decade. So if it is not a total collapse, I don't know what collapse stands for. And you have all these huge, beautiful properties that are not being used and that will be, turned into discotheques or I don't know what, because there is no people to maintain them. So the fact that we're becoming a minority has a significant cultural drama. But what the Ratzinger, the theologian, said is that it doesn't mean that we cannot become a dynamic minority. And a dynamic minority means that it's a minority that is so self-aware of its mission and so convinced of their blessings that is willing to influence positively in society. And that won't necessarily mean that that people will be open to consider Christianity. But they will be open, probably, especially if we lead by example, to learn from that example and do good things, because that is something that Christians saw in the past, something that happened when Christians were a minority, sometimes a persecuted minority in the Roman Empire, but because of their lifestyle and their joy and their witness and their testimony, they were able to change people around them, even if they would not necessarily renounce to a pagan or agnostic beliefs. So I think that is pretty encouraging, very encouraging, because we see how culturally the cookie is crumbling. And if we don't have a genuine, realistic optimism based on the experience of our forefathers in the faith, then everybody should be depressed. And it's not my case, and I don't think it should be yours. So that will be my my contribution. I hope it helps, and I will stay here to answer any questions once you are done with small groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to have you speak with us. So right now I've assigned everybody into breakout groups. So what we're going to do is be in those smaller groups for about 15 minutes. And Alejandro, you'll be in a group as well. So we're excited to have you discuss with a small group, and then we'll all come back together for a big discussion Q&A.
Brianne, I have a question. Sorry.
Sure, yeah.
So you said that we can't unmute, so we only send the questions through the chat, right?
Oh no, you don't. We were just saying we prefer that you send them through the chat, but if you don't want to do that, you can just unmute yourself and ask your question. But we just think the chat is just the best way to do it.
Okay. Now that I have unmuted myself, can I ask the question now?
Sure, go ahead.
No. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Thank you so much for coming today. And my question is that, so as you know, I missed the first section because I thought it was at 7:30, but I got a very good summary from my teammates, and I have a question. So it seemed as if you were talking about how there's an inverse relationship between being successful, materialistic, and countries that are successful in a material way or in capital ways, and being very religious countries with a specific practicing religion. And it seemed as if like the countries that are less successful, materialistic, tend to be more successful internally. So my question is that, is religion practicing, or the presence of an organized religion, the best indicator of success internally? In other words, I'm trying to draw the difference between spirituality and religion. And so my question is basically that, is the presence of a practicing religion or an organized religion a good indicator of internal success?
That is a really good question, and I think where are you coming from in terms of the question? But so let me give you an answer in two parts. Okay. The first part is that what we know statistically, so that the case that was made is that the lowest numbers of suicide, the strongest numbers of family commitment and support, which means, as you know, less loneliness, are related with countries with huge organized religions. That's, those are the statistical facts. Okay. Now, does it mean that only if you belong to organized religion, you are necessarily, that's the only way to be better in those markers, like interior peace and so forth? I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you this. One of the studies that was made during COVID, in how coping with COVID emotionally and psychologically was happening, there was a direct correlation between people of a faith community, a specific faith community, and much better rates of not suffering loneliness, not suffering depression, not suffering suicidal thoughts. So I think that it would be fair to conclude that the value of organized religion resides in that fact, in the fact that it provides a community, So I don't think that it denies that someone that is not in organized religion is not going to feel, better and have a better state of their soul, if you want. But the markers and the numbers lean towards, organized religion as being the difference here.
Thank you. That answers a lot.
Okay, so we have one in the chat, and yeah, just to emphasize, if you have a question, like, totally feel free to just unmute yourself, hop on. It just works out a little bit easier sometimes, so people aren't talking over each other. So we have a question in here. So the person said, we talked a lot about how the younger generation, like Generation Z, is turning away from the church. How do you suggest we reach out to these younger folks, or how can we change this trend/tide?
That is an interesting question. I don't think there is one answer to that. I don't think there is one answer, because I have seen different young Catholics reach out in very different manners. Okay, and I have seen them. I think it's too early to see, what is the rate of success, but I think different approaches that have been relatively successful, you know, in attracting that. I am personally involved with a ministry here in Denver. I'm based in Denver. A ministry that is called Christ in the City, and is a ministry to the homeless. And one of the beautiful things about Christ in the City is that we have young missionaries that are committed to give 1 year of their life. You know, normally right after undergraduate college, and is beautiful in every possible way. You know, and it's attracting, and a lot of people are really, other young people are really impressed with that. You know, we had a group the other day of Christ in the City missionaries going to an event, and there was a bunch of young people, you know, drinking outside because, you know, because of COVID, people can drink outside now, you know, in the bars, and and a couple of these guys asked, you know, the missionaries, "Hey guys, what do you do?" And one of them say, "Listen, we're Catholic missionaries that are working with the homeless, and we're on our way to Triangle Park to meet some of the homeless." And this guy, you know, with his beard that probably was his, you know, sixth or seventh, considering his state of mind, said just, "Oh, God freaking bless you guys." And freaking was not the word, you can imagine what the word was. So I think that is the beginning of a conversation. So what I see as commonalities of the different ministries that are successful is a genuine and transparent testimony of who we are. You know, there was no no shame or fear in this missionary to say, you know, we are Catholic missionaries and this is what we're doing. And so being genuine is one of the, you know, crucial components that I see as a commonality in all of these ministries. And then the other is the significant precedence of testimony over words. That is what really compels these guys, because in this example that I told you, these guys that were drinking in the streets just saw that this group of missionaries were, you know, young and talented, good looking, but were just different, you know. And that difference come because of a spiritual life, a serious spiritual life, and that shows. So that would be kind of my suggestion based on my experience.
Thank you so much for answering that question. So our next question from one of our attendees is, do you think that things like the rise of conspiracy theories in America represent people in secular, developed countries trying to find a substitute for religion?
Well, as a journalist, I've been following the whole conspiracy theories, and it's a very strange phenomenon, a very, very strange phenomenon. And so I don't think anybody has the answer of why it happens. You know, I have heard political answers, sociological answers. So I've heard different level of answers to that. So let me give you my 2 cents of what are the things that I personally believe after seeing it, and not only seeing it but interacting with people who believe them. You know, believe these conspiracy theories. And what I see is number one, there is such an absurd volume of information. You know, there is such a cacophony of sources of information that people has become extremely distrustful of any kind of information that does not fit their own vision of the world. Okay, so that tremendously reduces the credibility of the sources that used to be in the past, the sources that everybody will rely upon, like your average media, your average newscast, your average newspaper. That has completely disappeared because we have social media, everybody making their own news story. So there is this basically people equating, okay, because I can't trust sources, I don't trust any source, and that takes away also the reliable sources. And number two, probably most importantly, is that this time is extremely confusing. And what a conspiracy theory does is provide you an explanation of it provides you an explanation that gives you some kind of emotional peace, because to accept that the world is extremely confusing requires the ability to accept that sin, basically, human sin, is a mystery. It happens, and sometimes you can't explain things. When you try to get into the mind of a serial killer, for example, of a person that does like real bad evil, and you try to find an explanation, especially if you have been somehow victimized by that, why? And sometimes the answer is just pure evil, which is mysterious. Eh, In, and I think that people believing in conspiracy theories basically forget that both sin and grace are mysteries. But that's my take. I don't pretend to solve the mystery of conspiracy theories. So.
All right, well, maybe you can solve the mystery of how to bring unity in America. So this is from another person in the group, kind of following a similar theme here. She says, Alejandro, thank you for your talk. What suggestions do you have to grow in unity and community with one another in the midst of cultural division? Additionally, what do you feel the role of the news media is in this regard?
Of the what? I'm sorry?
The news media.
Okay. Yeah. Well, my suggestion, don't tell my colleagues I said this, okay? Because I'm a journalist, but you should stop reading too much stuff. You really, we all need a total detox from the news, I know that's not what my colleagues or myself would like to hear, but I think is that we need to dramatically increment person-to-person relationships, and I know that's hard now with COVID, and we have our guests on Zoom that because they are together, they have to wear a mask. So, this is a bad time, and I hope that we, beat it and get to a better time. But definitely, we need to build person-to-person relationships. And I think the things that I have found to help me the most, I am a consecrated, so I live in a community, and something that is a tremendous blessing is the fact that I can pray together and eat together. The breaking of bread and praying and worshiping together. I think, and if we add that, freeing ourselves from too many virtual influence and too much, TikTok or Twitter or whatever you use that are sources of opinion, and confusing and angering and depressing. I think that a reasonable detox from that could be really, really good. And, again, pray together, breaking bread together, and having fun together.
Awesome. Thanks so much for explaining. So now we have a question about Fratelli Tutti, which is Pope Benedict's encyclical. And
She's saying that's about.
yeah,
She-
yeah.
That's for Francis. It's like,
Oh.
I don't know.
So you had mentioned Pope Benedict, and any thoughts about Fratelli Tutti?
And my group, we also talked about, I mean, it's kind of off topic, but Pope Francis recently, as you know, came out and said, that homosexual civil unions should be allowed. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that as well. If anything's been cleared up regarding that statement too.
Okay, so let me say about Fratelli Tutti. I think the beauty of and the importance of Fratelli Tutti is basically in the Pope's perspective, in the Pope's approach, because the Pope himself described at the beginning of the encyclical that he's basically putting together things that he has already said or written before, and at every different level, from speeches to groups, homilies, his previous encyclical Laudato Si, or answers that he gave about these issues on a plane. So he decided to put them together. So if the text per se are not in itself are not new, but what I find valuable is how the Pope is absolutely convinced that Christian charity, which we know is essential for our salvation, is also very applicable to the world. The fact that he speaks about political charity, which is quite a demanding political love, those are things that everybody would say, like, man, that's not realistic, no? And he basically said it is, because if we can live, if we can live according to the commandment of love in our personal relationships, in our small communities, uh, why do we think that that cannot be extended into a larger community and even international relationships? So I think that's probably the most admirable part of Fratelli Tutti is this Pope's conviction that that when we Catholics or we Christians insist that the rules of love can be lived in the largest social realm, we are not being naive. We're being realistic, number one, and we are being faithful to our convictions, to the teachings of Jesus Christ. So that will be my take on Fratelli Tutti. And regarding the words of the words of the Pope about civil unions for same-sex couples, I think it's a little bit more complicated, because in this case it was a statement put in a video after making a lot of cuts that was in an interview made on June 2019. So I don't think there is too much to grab from that clip unless the Vatican clarifies it, clarifies the context, clarifies the reach of that, and so forth. But what I think is that whatever that means is still on the context of what the Pope thinks about LGBT people. And he's very clear that without changing Catholic doctrine, there is a lot that we can do in terms of what we can do pastorally, and in terms of empathy, of openness, of love. There is a lot that can be done before we go to debating doctrine. So I think that the Pope has been very consistent in that. I think it's pretty challenging to us, Catholics. Is a task to accomplish, and I think whatever the context of those words are, I think that what we can take out of that is a reminder that we have to approach the specific persons that are looking for our charity, that they find what they are looking for, that they are absolutely satisfied, and they see the love, mercy, and welcoming attitude of Jesus in each one of us. So that's my take on the words.
Okay, thank you. And then here's another really good question, I think. So he says, our group spoke about how oftentimes the separation of church and state is taken to an extreme, suggesting that Christians should not profess their beliefs in political forums at all. Do you see this view as a present threat to religious freedom in the United States?
Yeah, listen, the fanatics of the separation between church and state, I think, miss a very important point, which is, it was in the circles of French lay Catholicism that the concept of the separation between church and state actually took form, especially in the way that it is applied in the United States, in which there is this positive separation, because the understanding is not that one is at the top of the other, but is that none of them should be messing with the other one. And I think that is a pretty great accomplishment of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. But I think that those who think that it has to be taken into the extreme are confusing the separation of church and state, which is, absolute. I mean, it's the best that can happen for a democratic state and for a religion. That separation of church and state. That doesn't mean that the separation between church and state means a separation between religion and public life. That's another different story. If I show my faith in the public square, that's not a matter of the state. It's a matter of the society. And I can engage in a civil or not debate. But when we have a specific group, for example, that opposes the Catholic approach to a specific issue, and they say you should not impose your faith on us, we're not imposing our faith on anybody. In a democratic society, if I believe that say euthanasia, for example, should not be available, we Catholics believe that based on our faith that says that everybody shares the dignity of being created by God, But at the same time, our arguments, if you see, for example, what the Bishop Conference have presented, are based on rational and reasonable bioethics. We're not saying, it's a matter of faith. And imposing our faith will be, hey, listen, the police should enforce Catholic going to mass, and if you're watching a Broncos game, the police should come and drag your fat tail all the way to mass, and we're not asking that. We're not asking the political, the state or institutions to enforce our religious beliefs, But what we are saying is that as much as someone that says, euthanasia should be completely open and should be like equal to the Dutch government, apply to everybody, including to children. Okay, that guy has the right to say that. I have the right to say that we shouldn't, So let's go debate, go to a referendum, have our elected officials decide upon that, fight about it. But someone that believes because I am a Catholic, I should not express my opinion on moral, social issues, it's absurd. That's not a democracy. That will turn me or any other believer into a second-class citizen, and it beats the purpose of what a democracy is for. No second-class citizen. No.
Thank you for answering that. So I know it is 8 o'clock. So just to be conscious of everybody's time, if you have to leave, that's totally okay. But if you do have a couple more minutes, you are totally welcome to stay with us. We're going to ask about 2 more questions, and then we'll open up the space for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll end it there. But just wanted to let you guys know. So our next question is, there seems to be an increasing number of Catholic people villainizing other Catholics who disagree with them politically. How can we promote solidarity within the Church without ignoring contentious issues or falling into relativism?
Wow, that's a that's a tough one.
Excellent.
I will try to answer based on my experience. Catholics have fought one another for as long as the church exists. I think that the difference of opinion should be nevertheless debated into a frame made of what I believe are 2 crucial concepts. Okay, number one is the freedom of conscience. What is that? As you know, this is not a conservative concept. This is not a liberal concept. It's the teaching of the church. Is the last instance of moral decisions. And, what kind of policy you vote is a moral decision. It's not like, choosing between Count Chocula and Fruit Loops, which is not a moral decision, but voting for this or for that is a moral decision. And the last instance for the Catholic Church and Catholic teaching is the individual conscience. But of course, there is a modifier to that, which is a well-informed individual conscience based on the teaching of the church. So that is why legitimately, when a decision is taken on the rectitude of intention, devout Catholics can reach different conclusions. That's the reality. So I think there has to be a respect for the freedom of conscience in one hand, and the other one is even more important, is charity. Charity. Remember what St. Augustine used to say: in the fundamentals, unity; in the debatable, liberty; in everything, charity. So even in liberty, in the different opinions, if we are not able to act with charity, you know what? Leave the group, take a break, drink some Coke, and come back decided to engage in charity. And I think that is not too much to ask, but holiness is tough. So I hope we can make it.
All right, so this is the last one we have in the chat, and then definitely, if you have any more, just feel free to ask them. But so he says, as a follow-up question, what is the ideal society/government that allows Christianity to flourish? And he asks, are we doomed to be a minority, like you said?
Okay. One of the interesting things about the social doctrine of the church is that it establishes parameters for what can be a just society. And those parameters are have to do with with accepting the differences of cultures. You know, for example, the Korean society and why it became very successful in moving from poverty to wealth in 15 years. You know, the Korean model was the many Latin American countries with this endemic poverty, like my country, you know, Peru, try to replicate the Korean model, and they realize that it's not a model; it's a culture. You know, we do not have elements of the Korean culture that makes them, you know, far more organized than we Latinos are. And this is not demeaning to anybody. It was just we are different. You know, why a Swedish will accept, you know, a Swedish company will accept paying 95% of their taxes because they come from a culture that is extremely communitarian. You know, they come from a culture that to survive other entities or to survive the weather and so forth required a tremendous level of community life. Now, despite all these different all these differences, we're still one human community. So that's why the church says that, you know, the belief in subsidiarity, in the common good, in solidarity, and so forth, is universal. You know? So there is not one political model that would be that will be, let's say, more favorable or less favorable to Catholicism or to religion in general to prosper. I think the defiance is not so much in political organization, but in cultural organization. You know, if secularism becomes a religion, and it looks that more and more is becoming a religion, with its own dogmas and with its own inquisition, even if they operate in social media without calling themselves an inquisition, if all that happens, you know, it doesn't matter what kind of social structure we live in, a super liberal society or, you know, super communitarian society, there will always be a difficulty for us to live. So in the current circumstances, I think the future doesn't look good for a majority of Christians, you know. And you see that happening even in continents like in Latin America, where Catholicism used to be the majority, and right now is not, at least not in practice. I mean, when you go and ask, people will say, yes, I'm Catholic because I've been baptized and I'd like to get married in a Catholic church. But at the end of the day, their choices are not Catholic choices. You know? So yeah, I think that we have to prepare ourselves to be a minority and to be a dynamic or creative minority, as you know, Joseph Ratzinger would used to say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for explaining that answer. So I just wanted to thank everybody for submitting your very insightful and thought-provoking questions. And before we end, I just wanted to see if anybody had any last questions. All right. Well, it was so lovely to be able to hear from Alejandro this evening and to just, I mean, I was able to go into every breakout room and get a little glimpse of what you were all discussing. And I'm really proud of all of you for being so mature and respectful in your discussions and for sharing such wonderful insight with one another, because this is the reason why we do this, just to help have fruitful conversations with each other, to spark new ideas, new thoughts, to ultimately foster our spirituality. So thank you everybody for attending and participating tonight. It is just so nice to see that all of you were able to stay on and participate. So we really appreciate that. And we hope that you have a good rest of your evening. And we just want to say one more final thank you to Alejandro Bermudez for being our featured speaker tonight. Round of applause for you. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wonderful insight with us. We love hearing from you.
Actually, guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am not saying this out of politeness or anything. It's absolutely inspiring for someone like me to see young guys that are willing to have a conversation about these issues, because this is already changing the world. Little by little, is the fact that that you are interested in engaging in this conversation and think a little bit more about how can you share the blessings that you have with others. That's the hope for the future. So thank you, guys. God bless you.
All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your night, and we hope to see you next month for our next Spiritual Chats event.
Thank you, Alex. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.